What was rural life like during the Great Depression era? Although some may think rural life was leisurely, agriculture was tiresome, filled with hard work and little to no pay. Women worked just as much, if not more, than men during the Victorian era. It was not unusual for women to work 16-hour days. It was strange to have women working and doing a man's job instead of just working in the house. This was a long day, especially for women. Child labor was very common in the Great Depression era. Children were expected to help supplement the family budget and were sent to work quite young. They received very low pay for long hours and a lot of manual labor. Children were able to fit into smaller places where adults could not fit. It was extremely unsafe, and those who did were often killed. Children as young as 5 years old were expected to work 12 hours. A lot of children became criminals and found pickpocketing easier than manual labor in workhouses. Men's roles were distinctively defined by older generations. Economic and social advancements reached unprecedented levels, and the men credited with these achievements were expected to be dutiful and attentive husbands and fathers. Men were the head of the household. Where the boy grew up was how he was taught how to raise a family. Men were in charge of politics, work, and everything outside of the home. It was in the hands of the sons to carry on the family lineage.
Live theater was most definitely not for children, as people had rude and obnoxious behaviors, not at all like what theaters are today. Theater audiences could be rude, noisy, and dangerous. There was a lot of drinking. People threw food at actors demanding popular music to be played. Some even ended in riots. Both rich and poor were separated by how much they could pay. In front of the stage, young men would drink together, eat nuts, and mingle with prostitutes down below in the notorious pit. The Bartholomew Fair was held in London every September for 4 days. The thousands of visitors who went there could witness dozens of entertainments and spectacles, including tumbling, acrobatics, and tightrope walking, or exhibitions of exotic animals, boxing competitions, puppet shows, and displays of human strength. Thousands of people attended. There was much eating, and local authorities became nervous because of how much drinking there was. Bull baiting was a very common and gruesome blood sport. It occurred in busy marketplaces or town squares. Badgers and bears were also used in place of bulls. Animals were tied to the stake and dogs were sent to attack. This was very inhumane. Thankfully, popularity slowly disappeared due to changing attitudes on animal rights.
The Victorian era had many different types of housing.
For the first half of the 19th century, the rural and urban poor had much in common. Unsanitary and overcrowded housing, low wages, poor diet,
insecure employment, and the dreaded effects of sickness and old age. They were created in the 18 and 1900s. They covered many styles from Gothic Revival to Italian Renaissance to Secondary Empire. Different styles were incorporated into one house.
In the truly grand houses, wallpaper was all the rage, usually with a floral pattern. Heavy curtains covered the windows, carpeted rugs covered wood floors, and rooms were stuffed with furniture. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, workhouses were places people went if they had nowhere else to go.
Work conditions were worse than the lowest living standards of the independent laborer. Workhouses provided indoor relief for the elderly, sick, and orphaned. Some husbands left their wives there. They were very overcrowded with violence and criminal behavior.
The invention of the drill made farming more efficient. In 1701, a Berkshire man, Jethro Tull, invented the drill, a machine for sowing seeds in regular rows instead of wastefully scattering them by hand. It saved time and was more efficient. The medieval way of farming was an open field system, meaning that there were temporary fences keeping cattle from roaming on crops. After the crop was harvested, the land would revert to a common land for cattle grazing. The lower class would use strips of land given to them by the upper class temporarily as land to farm crops. It was only owned by lower class during the harvest season. Breeding of good livestock changed the farming industry. Robert Bakewell became famous for his new breed of sheep known as Lancasters, which grew fat and matured more quickly than others. They provided better meat and wool and were more valuable.
Dorset farmers in England worked extremely hard for very little pay, just enough to get by. Dorset farmers working in the 1850s earned 6 shillings a week. That's about 54 cents a week. Their meals consisted of flour, butter with water poured over it, bread, potatoes, and beer. Bacon was a luxury. 1 shilling would be equivalent to 9 cents in US dollars. 1 penny would be equivalent to 3/4 of a US penny. Men at the age of 42 earned 6 shillings, 81 cents a week. Women at the age of 40 earned 9 pennies a week. 12-year-old boys would earn 2 shillings, 18 cents a week. 8-year-old boys earned 1 shilling, 9 cents a week. Children were often seen as an economic burden, spending 1/3 of their earnings on them. Marriage was thought through and a big commitment in the 1800s, unlike it is today. Civil law allowed girls to marry at 12 and boys to marry at 14. However, most couples had to wait until they had accumulated enough money and resources to establish their own household. Most people married in their mid-20s. Often marriages would be arranged because of money, land, and business connections. People got married young because the later they got married, there was a higher infant mortality rate.
Some people may think that rural life during the Victorian era was fairly trouble-free. However, people living a rural lifestyle endured many hardships. Most people worked long, hard hours with little to no pay and barely any food. Living and working conditions were horrible, and there was a lot of violence and crime. Rural life during the Great Depression era was challenging.